I'm in Menasha along the shore of Lake Winnebago, and the landscape you see on the water today is very different than it was 160 years ago. You see, there used to be a lighthouse right out there, perched on top of a landmass that is no longer visible. In fact, so obscure is this lighthouse that no photos exist of it, very few details of the building and occupants can be had, and no physical remains of the structure were known until recently. A dedicated group of volunteers joined my quest to separate the fact from the fiction and uncover the real story behind one of Menasha's biggest and oldest hidden historical structures, the Menasha Lighthouse. I am just offshore from the mouth of the Menasha Channel, standing on Lighthouse Reef, which used to be, well, an island. You see, before the original 1847 Menasha Dam was upgraded and rebuilt in 1883, the natural water level of the entire lake was around 3 feet lower than it is today, exposing the land I am currently standing on. Back in the mid-1800s, this now flooded piece of land was the most significant landmass in Lake Winnebago's navigational history. It was the very first spot where the first lighthouse was erected on the lake. Right below my feet lay the heavy stones and remains of the massive wooden crib that once formed the foundation for the two-story lighthouse. What exactly is a crib, you may ask? Let me show you. A lighthouse crib is a foundation structure, usually made out of timber, and was used in locations conventional foundations could not be built. The original Menasha Lighthouse had a crib that was 4 feet tall and had a footprint that measured 56 feet by 56 feet. The hollow center was 34 feet by 34 feet and housed the stone cellar walls of the lighthouse, while the outer 22 feet was filled in with rock to hold the entire building in place and protect the lighthouse from damaging ice flows. This outer area was planked over and had the oil house and freshwater cistern built on top of it. A second lighthouse crib was placed in the same area in 1895 to hold the smaller cousin to the original lighthouse. This crib was 12 feet tall and had a footprint that measured 14 feet by 14 feet and held a lantern that the lighthouse keeper had to row out to every evening to light. After extensive research, we headed out to the location near the mouth of the Menasha Channel where I calculated the lighthouse remains would be located. That is, if any survived. Luck seemed to be on our side, and the divers were able to locate some of the crib remains despite the water conditions and the soot that covered the lake bottom. The volunteer divers located segments of the crib after about an hour of searching. To our amazement, they were able to locate some of the crib's fully intact 20-foot timbers, partially buried on the lake bottom. The divers were also able to locate a smaller, more manageable section of the crib and brought it to the surface, in which case the photo ops began and everybody started posing with a 160-year-old wood celebrity, including our boat's captain, Mike Taylor. This is the recovered 160-year-old crib section for the Menasha Lighthouse. This small 2-foot section weighs over 40 pounds, a small fraction of the 350-pound full-size timber this section came from. This piece came from the bottom timbers of the crib, and the hole you see right here held a metal rod that went through the next 4 consecutive timbers set on top of it. Over 190 metal rods were used in the construction of the crib. These metal rods are what held the entire lighthouse crib together. This artifact, along with the other remains of the crib, were found over 150 feet from the location the lighthouse actually stood. Now you might ask, how did 350-pound timbers move 150 feet across the lake on their own? Well, the answer is simple: ice shoves. Ice shoves were, and still are, a cause for concern for any building or structure along the shoreline of Lake Winnebago. Ice shoves can be massive and reach heights in excess of 20 feet, decimating anything in their path. But the ice had some help back in the late 1800s to eradicate the structure from the landscape. Even though the U.S. government built the lighthouse in 1855, Congress decommissioned the beacon in 1859, just 4 short years after it became operational. The lighthouse is mothballed and sat vacant for 2 decades before a couple of young teens went ice skating around the area in 1879 and ventured inside to get out of the cold. They lit a fire in the first floor fireplace and did not properly attend to the roaring flames, which ended up catching the surrounding woodwork on fire, completely burning the wooden interior parts of the building. All that remained were the exterior masonry walls and the crib foundation. Once the original Menasha Dam was replaced in the late 1800s, the water level of the lake rose and the winter ice shelves bulldozed over the remaining structure. It's pretty exciting knowing that the remnants of the old 1855 lighthouse are still within the borders of the city of Menasha. Unfortunately, you have to get a little bit wet in order to view it. Oddly enough though, the lighthouse was never actually needed. It was a prime example of early pork barrel spending by the U.S. government. So let's explore why the lighthouse was built, why it was decommissioned, and who actually served in the lighthouse for the 4 years it was in operation. The Menasha Lighthouse was a pet project of the area's very own James Doty, who was a congressman at the time. In the years leading up to the navigation beacon being approved, Doty convinced Washington, D.C. that Menasha was going to be a major transportation area for merchandise, supplies, and tourists traveling by water. Congress ended up approving the plans in 1853 and appropriated $5,000 for the construction of the Menasha Lighthouse, with the final blueprints completed and filed on May 25, 1854. The contract to build the lighthouse was awarded to Allison Sweet & Company from Ozaki, Wisconsin, who also won bids to build an additional 6 government lighthouses around the Midwest. Sweet & Company contracted with Messrs. Blake and Matthias to manufacture 12 million bricks used in the construction of all 7 lighthouses. The lighthouse design was similar to some that you see in northern Door County lighthouses. It contained a parlor room, pantry, and kitchen on the first floor, while the second floor held 2 bedrooms and a small room off to the side of the keeper's sleeping quarters that gave access to the lantern deck above. The only lighthouse keeper appointed to maintain the beacon was Dennis Crowley, who lived on site for the 4 short years of operation. The only official record of Mr. Crowley is a salary found within the vaults of the National Archives. Urban legend has Crowley rowing back to the lighthouse in November of 1858 after visiting Menasha, and he became stuck halfway when the ice formed around his boat, which forced him to spend the night on the lake, and received severe frostbite on his fingers and toes, which required amputation. None of the legend can be verified, as government records indicate Mr. Crowley manned the lighthouse all 4 years until it was decommissioned by Congress in 1859. There is one scant record of Crowley seeking relief from Congress in 1872 for the injuries received escaping the Menasha Lighthouse, but no further details could be found to clarify what the injury was or the date he received the injuries. With the construction of the second Menasha Dam, Grass Island, which was home to the Menasha Lighthouse, became an underwater reef which posed yet another danger to the various boats that traveled through Menasha. Pretty amazing, isn't it? All of that raw power contained within the moving water behind me used to provide power to most of the mills that once lined the shore. This is the 3rd generation of dams in this location. The very first dam was a private venture and allowed by the government with the condition that it could not raise the water level on Lake Winnebago. A second, larger dam was built to replace the original one, which raised the lake's water level. And finally, the dam you see before you was built in 1937 to replace the second dam, which keeps the lake at its current level. Construction of the original Menasha Dam began in 1847 and was completed by 1850, 5 years prior to the Menasha Lighthouse's existence. Originally, the dam was regulated by private interests, mainly the mills that used the water power to operate their equipment. However, in 1881, Lake Winnebago received a tremendous amount of rain, which caused a water level of the lake to rise above flood stage, damaging many communities on the southern shores. The flooding was caused by a flaw in the original design of the Menasha Dam. The U.S. government took control of the situation and started to build a new state-of-the-art dam in 1883, completing it by 1886. The new dam was built with a needle weir, which allowed sections to be opened in the structure during high water levels. The newly constructed dam had a price tag of $16,069, which equals $382,069 in today's currency. Now you may ask, where was the original dam located? Well, that's a damn good question. It was located less than 50 feet above where the current dam is sitting today. Even after the original Menasha Lighthouse is deemed unnecessary by the government, complaints kept coming in about the difficulty in navigating the man-made canal that brought boats between Lake Winnebago and Little Lake Beetamore. Even after the new dam was carefully planned and built, causing the higher water levels in the Winnebago system, underwater hazards still posed problems for the many vessels passing through. It was later decided navigation lights had to be re-established in Menasha's waterways. However, it was determined a full manned lighthouse was not required. 31 years after the original lighthouse in Lake Winnebago was decommissioned, the Lighthouse Board once again recommended establishing a beacon on Lake Winnebago, along with one over here just below the Menasha Lock in Little Lake Beetamore. The need was caused by nighttime water traffic having difficulty maneuvering through the government channel. So in 1896, the U.S. government finally appropriated $500 for the construction of range lights on Little Lake Beetamore and on Lake Winnebago. The location of the lower light was 3,400 feet northwest of the lock. The lower light was completed and put into operation on the night of July 18, 1899, only to have it catch fire and destroyed the very next day. But the light was re-established only 5 days later on July 24th. Both the upper and lower lights had to be removed from the water at the end of each navigation season to protect the equipment from getting damaged by winter's harsh conditions. In fact, in 1904, the lower light curb structure was carried away by ice and had to be rebuilt for the next season. The new beacons were made from timber and stood tall enough to place the focal plane approximately 19.5 feet above the surface of the water. Each light was assigned to a different lighthouse keeper in the area. The lower light on Little Lake Beetamore was assigned to Henry Lenz, while the light on Lake Winnebago was maintained by local boat builder John Arft. Mr. Arft also was contracted by the government to repair and paint the lighthouses when they needed attention. Maintaining these smaller unmanned lights came at a cost of $25 per month, going to each of the two keepers. By 1929, the two lights were worse for wear and had to be replaced with newer platforms, with the new lanterns using acetylene for fuel. Eventually, during the 1930s, the two beacons became obsolete and were discontinued as all navigation aids for the river system were being converted to buoys. Well, there you have it, the history of the Menasha Lighthouse. I hope you enjoyed the educational video on the very unique aspect of Menasha history. Our city contains many historic gems and stories from eras gone by and exceptional opportunities to explore and discover those gems. It is a disservice to the heritage of Menasha when we, as a community, fail to see what helped shape this city, even if those things are no longer visible, just like the lighthouse. Until next time, I'm Steve Krueger from the Historical City with the Future, and this has been Hidden History.